As you get comfortable writing if statements, you'll begin to try to write more complex if statements to try to solve more complex problems. Complex if statements, sometimes called nested if statements, can be hard to read and hard to understand. Let's take a look at the general form of a complex or nested if statement. This is just an example of a nested if-else statement. They don't all have to look like this. They can be different, depending on the problem that you're trying to solve. The general form of the nested if-else statement will include an outer if statement, followed by an inner if or multiple inner ifs, which may or may not have else statements with them. So here we have an outer if with an inner if-else, and then the else that goes with the outer if, with some statements, followed by an inner if-else. It's very important when you do write nested if statements to be sure to use indentation. The compiler doesn't need to see the indentation, but someone trying to read your program will, and will be grateful that you've indented the program to make it easier to read. By using indentation, the reader can immediately focus in on the parts of the program that they want to look at. If everything is flush left, then you have to really wade through all the syntax and curly braces. So indentation is important for the person reading the program, not necessarily for the compiler. Now let's look at an example of a nested if-else statement. Before we start though, I want to make a change to our code blocks editor. In the last few lessons we've been working with if statements, and we've had automatic brace completion turned on, which meant that every time we wrote a left or opening curly brace, a right or closing curly brace was added in. For this particular example, it's going to get kind of confusing when you notice all the braces that we're going to use. So what I want to do now is turn brace completion off. So if you would go up to your settings menu and select editor, then come down to where it says brace completion, uncheck that box and click OK. Alright, now we're ready for the problem. We're going to write a little program that helps a person of a certain age figure out what they can and cannot do. If that doesn't make much sense, it will when you see the program. So the first thing we're going to do is declare a variable for an age. And then we're going to prompt the person to enter their age and get it from the console. This program is primarily for people between the ages of, say, 15 and 22, and this will kind of give them some of the things they can and cannot do legally at that age. So our first if statement is going to say if age is less than 18. Open brace, and then we're going to say cout, you can't vote yet, because you're not of legal age. Indel. Now we're going to have an inner if, or a nested if statement, and say if they're less than 16, if the age is less than 16, then that person can't drive yet either. Close off that if with a closing brace. Then we'll have an else, which says you can drive, because they're at least 16 years old. Write an indel at the end of that line. And now we're ready to close off the else and then the if part of age being less than 18. Now we're ready to write the else part of that. If their age is 18 or greater, then the first thing we're going to write is that you can vote. And that's the first thing we're going to check for if they're 18 or greater. Then the next thing we want to do is check to see if they're less than 21, because that's the next big age milestone. And we'll say if they're less than 21 years old, they can vote, but you can't drink, at least not in most states. Close off that if, then have an else for that situation, which would mean that if they're not less than 21, they must be 21 or older, so they can vote, they can drive, and drink. And that finishes off the else part and closes out the complete if-else statement. Now we're ready to run and test the program, and we'll test it with ages less than 15 up to 22, say. So we've got several runs to go. First we need to build it, make sure that it compiles correctly, and it does. So we enter the first age as 15, It says you can't vote yet, you can't drive yet either, and that's right, because they're only 15 years old. We run it again, this time enter the age of 16. It says you can't vote yet, you can drive, and that's right. Run it again, this time enter 17, same result. Now we'll try 18. You can vote, but you can't drink. We might also want to say in there that they can drive, but that's really not part of the problem. 19 is going to be the same, and 20. Let's try 21. You can vote, you can drive, and drink. That covers everything. And then we might test 22, although if we get 21 right, then 22 is going to be the same. So there we go. So there's an example of how you can use nested if statements to make decisions that are somewhat complex and can't fit into a simple if-else.